you can take this conversation beyond just art, because I think this is relevant in just culture and society as well. But sometimes we need the feminine energy to dominate. Sometimes we need the masculine energy to dominate. It's not always the same. Sometimes one has more of an important role at certain times. And so one of the things I always say to writers is you have at least two people who are working on this story. You have the writer and you have the editor. And you should not invite the editor to the writer's room. And the writer needs to leave when the editor steps in. This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Exploring the challenges of the creative call
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
Here we go. Once again, another episode. This one's interesting because Evan and I have alluded to this in many conversations. We've never actually directly talked about it. And we thought, you know what? After that last conversation, let's just get into this. So we're talking about the relationship of masculine and feminine energy in creativity or art or whatever it may be. And yeah, I mean, if you're interested in seeing how this conversation was born and where it came from, it'd be worth it to tune into the last conversation because it led us here. And I think we ended up tapping into some cool stuff at the end of it, which really kind of are going to touch on in this one. But yeah, I think it's interesting that what you pointed out, I'll say, Evan, is that with feminine energy, it creates potential. And I think that's where the masculine energy then begins to really flourish. And in some ways, you could say it's the opposite as well, because in masculine energy also creates a structure for the potential to be directed and focused. Because with the feminine energy, it can be like if it's unguided, it can just be kind of, it doesn't really capture anything specific. So it's just like open, right? And I think that it's this relationship of you touch back in with the other. So an interesting thing I'll just start off my point with is that in one of my screenwriting classes that I do, we start with feminine energy. We start with stuff like, what is a story? What is an idea? Tell me about this. People just open up, and then you do a little bit of this, and it's really cool because people are like, wow, I never actually asked myself like what a story it was or what an idea was. And people start thinking about this and they start kind of figuring out these ideas, and it's really cool. And especially when people work together and they start sharing and, combating their ideas in a sense, but like in a playful, fun kind of way. And they're like, yeah, like that. Yeah. And then we get to a point where we get into like, okay, well, we're going to start to learn structure. And then they structure out their story and they learn how to do that. And they get very excited because people are like, hey, I have all these wild ideas and all these things, and now I know how to focus them. But we always come to this point where it's like, yeah, and you know what you'll find is that you structure out the story, which is your idea of how the story is going to go, and you just abandon it all of a sudden. At some point, you just go, you know what, I'm just off. And you're like, well, what happens? I'm like, well, you let it go that way. You let it breathe there. But what you'll find is that you'll eventually come to a point where you need to go back to your structure again, and you'll go back to your structure, and then you might go, okay, well, I went over here, so that structure at this point doesn't work anymore, so let me kind of restructure out where I think I'm going next. And it's just this relationship that happens, and you kind of flip to one to the other. So I think we're talking about the relationship between masculine and feminine energy and creativity, but we're also talking about how they're two sides of the same coin. There's a holistic element. You kind of want to have both, and where to place both and how to use both. And also I think what we can get into, Evan, is we can talk a little about where we get too much in one and it misleads us and gets us stuck or limited. And I think that would be interesting to explore as well. So I'll pass it on to you and you tell me your thoughts, man.
No, I'm game. I'm on the same page as you, I think, from just some of those last comments that you said. Yeah, it's not a one thing is better than the other. It's not like they're different things. Like they're different, but they're part of the same process that is creativity in the world and as human beings. It's like, 'cause you need both of these things. Like I think at the end, the last one I was saying, you know, like the feminine is like the potential and the masculine is the manifestation, right? You could also look at it as like the theoretical and the material, right? Like it's taking something that's kind of like from the ether, which is the feminine, and like let's make this into something tangible. Let's turn this into it. And it's that process between them. And again, one is not necessarily better than the other. It's also been described to like the feminine is kind of like chaos, right? Like it's anything is possible at any time, like wow, and that's freaking incredible, right? But then there's like, and then the masculine is like, okay, that's great. Let's take some of that and focus it into something that's actually usable, functional, or even just something that's, what's the word? Accessible, maybe is the better word for it. Just like making some of that accessible. It's like shining a light through like a magnifying glass or a prism or something like that. You know, you got this big ball of energy that is the sun up there, and it's like just casting everywhere. And it's like, okay, let's focus this into a place and in a certain kind of way, right? And so this is just me describing, like, I don't know, just a lot of different ways of thinking about that relationship between masculine and feminine and how those things work together, right? And it's not like it's just, I don't even think it's always just one way either, right? Because the creative process is kind of like, you know, you're moving back and forth in between those things, right? It's like you're taking some of this creative thing. It's like, okay, let's focus that over here, and we got this. And it's like, oh wait, hang on a second, we've hit a block or something, and so now we're looking back up the other way, we're reaching back up into that chaos a little bit. We're searching for some ideas, some things that haven't been tapped into yet, and we find something, right? Because again, that feminine is an inexhaustible, just pure creative energy, right? Like there's an inexhaustible source of ideas and ways of doing things, and it's just like, but they can't all happen at once. Right? Like they are all happening at once in a certain way, but in the material sort of world, in order to make something, you can't do that, because otherwise it becomes a mess, right? Like it's like a movie or a story that just can't seem to decide on who it's for. Right? It's just like, is this for fucking kids or is this for adults? Right? Because you just gave me some childish scene and now somebody just got decapitated. Right? Like, what the fuck am I even watching right now? Right? And we kind of get frustrated by that, because it's just like, yeah, like it hasn't been focused properly. Right? So I don't know. I'm just kind of going off on and I'm just sort of, I guess, having fun just exploring that relationship and imagining it in different kinds of ways right now. But yeah, I'll just leave it at that, perhaps, in terms of some of my initial thoughts on this masculine creative relationship, or masculine feminine creative relationship.
Okay, a word that came up for me while you were talking was outlet. So one of the things that I do, just to give people a little teaser, if you ever wanted to do this course, initially, like class 1, we talk about like what's an idea, what's a story, whatever. We explore, we open up, we start to consider what this stuff is. But then ultimately what you're going to get to is I help people go through a process of putting together what I call a concept. And it's where you take many ideas and you put them together in kind of in a way that somewhat makes sense. And what happens for people is they have all these ideas, but there's no outlet for anything. And that can be a very frustrating thing. And this is where, but you gotta, in my experience, I find, and I'm not going to say this is the way, because maybe someone else has a different way of doing things. And maybe it's not always this way for me, and I'm just not aware of it in this moment. But I do find that I generally begin with a feminine energy in creativity. It's an idea, it's an inspiration, it's a feeling. I'm listening to a song, I get an image in my head. It's all very potential, it's all like what could happen. Then I need an outlet for it. And because I often think in movies and screenplays and stories, it becomes my outlet. And so then I go back to my principles and structures and whatever rules of story. And then I go, okay, well, could I take this idea, this feeling, this thing, and could I put it into that medium? One of the things I've been playing with a lot recently, Evan, has been I have many stories on the go right now. I have a novel, I have a screenplay, I have a TV series, and I have a play. And the reason why I have 4 is because all of these scripts, they all started off as screenplays. They all started off as just scripts. This is going to be a script, and this is my horror film, and this is my thriller, and this is my whatever. And I was like, you know what? This story is just better as a novel. It would just be way better as a novel. So I'm like, you know what? This is a novel. And then another one, it was like this horror film I was working on, and I was like, no, this is a good film. This feels like a film, like a nice, tight 90-minute fucking freak you out a little bit. And also I was thinking about it as far as like the vehicle in which this story, this horror film, I don't love horror it's not my favorite medium of storytelling. I'm nothing against it. Like I work with lots of writers who are great. They're great at horror and they love it. It's not my favorite medium, but I do appreciate it when it's done well, when it's really scary and it's done really well and it gives me an experience. I can really appreciate horror. And so there's a part of me, it's almost a bit of a rite of passage. I'm like, hey, you got to knock out one horror film in your life, like one horror script at least. Just get one done, you know? Because they always go thriller for me. And I'm like, why am I always going off track? And anyway, I was like, you know what? This uncomfortable subject matter, I don't want to have to hang out with it forever. And the nice thing about a screenplay is it's really only like, I think it's like 18,000 words in general, like usually. So you can kind of knock it out. You can kind of get it done. And then it's easy. But like a novel, you have to sit with it. You have to work out details. You really have to give people certain access, at least more so than a script. So this one like sci-fi project I've been working on, I'm like, yeah, but I want to build the world. I really want people to experience the world. And the scope of this project is so big that like, I'd need it to be like a blockbuster movie if I was going to make it. And so I was like, I'll never get to experience this as a blockbuster, like not anytime soon at least. So why don't I just make it as a novel? Then I get to tell the story I want to tell and explore it in that medium. So my point is that I was thinking about this feminine energy. It's like the masculine in a lot of ways is the outlet. And it's like, hey, what parts of this can we put into this outlet? And what outlet is the right way to communicate this idea? And I think that, if you have an outlet, but you have nothing to fill the outlet with, if you have nothing to kind of put through it, what are you doing, right? But then if you have all this great potential and all this ideas, but you have no way to direct it or focus it or give it an outlet, essentially, it becomes a burden, because you're like, I have this idea, but I don't know what to do with it, right? Yeah, and it's an interesting thing. Oh, one other thing I'll just share while I'm on this topic. I had a friend, he's been reaching out to me for years. He's like, we got to write a screenplay together. We got to write this script together, a story together. I'm like, okay. And I never really knew what he meant. And then the other night, he's like, explain to me the idea. And so I was kind of going, okay, so what you want to do is like this. He's like, yeah, you're getting it. Because I could understand how it could be done in an outlet. And he's like, I'm going to get on it. I'm going to start doing it. Because like he had this great idea. He has this great idea. But he's not really in the film industry. Is like, he's never really like done story. But he has a great idea. And it's really about how do I take this great idea and what medium, in what way do I put it through? And initially he presented to me like, we need to write this script. And I thought he meant a movie. But it turns out, I'm like, well, this is a TV series. Like, this is not a movie. This is a TV series. It's like, great. But he just needed that kind of scope and direction and like outlet to go like, that's how I'm going to express this idea properly. And I was telling him, sorry, I know I'm dominating a little bit. Like I was telling him, you don't have to write the whole TV series. You could just write the pilot and a pitch and create a treatment for the whole idea. Like you don't have to write 13 episodes of some show, like, which is a massive, thing. But you could write we could write the pilot, We could create the pitch deck. We could put put everything together and show kind of how it would work. And that would probably be enough to make somebody bite on this story you got. He was like, wow, that's so cool. Okay, great. I'm going to get started. It's like he has all this great energy and these ideas, but they didn't know where to go. And that's what I talk about. That's like, I think what we're talking about, I say, is that's where the feminine energy sometimes just needs the masculine outlet.
That's interesting. I've never thought about it in this way because oftentimes, when you think of art forms, right, there is this sort of automatic association of, oh, that's feminine stuff, right? But it actually isn't. The art forms themselves are actually masculine, yes. Right? Like the creative urge and force and all that stuff, that's all the feminine stuff. The inspiration, all of that, that's all the feminine. The forms are actually, it's like, no, these are all constructs and creations in order to funnel that creative energy, which makes it the masculine thing, right? Like, because I've often heard of the masculine is about holding space, right? About, or being a container or whatever, but I like the holding space. The masculine holds space for things, right? And keeps it contained in a certain area. And it's like, well, yeah, what are all of the art forms, right? What is music and painting and literature and acting and whatever it is? These are all just places where you can place that creative energy. It's all a way of sort of funneling it, channeling that energy into something that can become tangible, right? Because otherwise it just stays in that land of theoretical, right? It just stays in that thing of potential that can never be shared. It can never be shared or witnessed or taken in, right? So it's again, like it's such a beautiful thing, that relationship. And I think it's important to talk about life and art and stuff like that in this kind of way, because I feel like, very often in our world, we can get caught up in stupid arguments over, it's like, no, this is better, like real, just like we need the feminine to like take over and blah, blah, blah. It's just like, well, we probably definitely in recent history, just probably, yeah, like there's been places where we need more feminine energy to be coming into it, but it doesn't mean that we need to just remove the masculine from things, right? It's like, it's what is that harmony that exists where they are, when they're together, that's when things are healthy and things are creative. Because like I love just exploring and discovering how these things, like, they go together so beautifully, right? They can't be without the other. It's like one thing that you were mentioning is how, these things can get, like, if it's too much of one or the other, it can get ugly, right? It can become unhealthy, right? Because if you just go too masculine, right? Where it's just like everything's just material, right? That's when things start to become too mechanistic and things can become destructive, because they don't come in with that, because that feminine creative potential is also about what's possible, right? And what's possible is also full of beautiful ideals, right? And wisdom and all kinds of things also occupy in that space. And so if you're just materializing things that aren't guided by that element, it can get really bad, right? Or as we've talked about before, it's like you're not really creating things anymore. Everything's just derivative. Everything's just contrived, because the masculine's not really coming up with the new ideas, right? Like it's just kind of like function. Like we can, like, let's make this thing work. And there's something so beautiful about like making this thing work, right? Where the feminine's like, hey, I've got this idea. And it's just like, okay, great. Let's make that work. Right. Let's make that something that we can that we can put out and share and give, and people can understand it, or they can have an experience of it in some kind of a way. Let's do that, right? And that's the marriage of those things. And I think that's that's such an incredible thing. And again, it's never a situation of one is better than the other. It's like they're both so essential to each other. They're not in competition with one another. They're perfectly in sync when they're in it, sort of like when they're in their nature with one another. Yeah.
And and I would say that it's not all about, like, to throw in a word, it's not all about equality in the sense that everything is equal all the time. It's not what it's about. I think that's actually, you can take this conversation beyond just art, because I think this is relevant in just culture and society as well. But sometimes we need the feminine energy to dominate. Sometimes we need the masculine energy to dominate. It's not always the same. Sometimes one has more of an important role at certain times. And so one of the things I always say to writers is you have at least two people who are working on this story. You have the writer and you have the editor. And you should not invite the editor to the writer's room. And the writer needs to leave when the editor steps in. And when you write a script, yes, you're going to bounce between masculine and feminine energy. Like, here's my idea and here's how to put my idea into something and like make it work. But when you actually write the script, when you actually finally structure out the script and you're about to write the script and you kind of have an idea of what you're about to do, and you go, okay, I got the characters, I got the story, I got the point, I got the genre, I figured out the concept and all of that. Get the masculine out. At that point, it's feminine. It's just, you just feel your way through the script at that point. Let the dialogue flow. Let people say what they're going to say. It's already got the container. It's already got the space to be explored. Write it out. Then when the script's done, you hit the final page and you're done and you write the end. The writer goes home and they go on vacation, which is the feminine energy. And the editor steps in, which is the masculine energy. And you need to look at it brutally, like, okay, this idea is cliche. This idea doesn't really work that well. What the hell are we saying right here? What a stupid piece of dialogue. Because the feminine energy is going to get all sensitive about that. It's, but I really like that. And I really put my heart and soul into that shit. And it's like, the editor needs to come and be like, listen, this just doesn't work, right? So you edit it. And then what happens is you get the editor to go on vacation and you have the writer show back up and go, okay, here's my editor's notes. Here's the new container. Let's fucking flow into that container. And so then you work together. But if you go, I'm going to be equal masculine and feminine energy at all times, it's not going to work. I promise you, it's not going to work. And it's also not going to work in relationships either. It doesn't work because sometimes one needs to take the floor. And I think we have an unhealthy, immature relationship to masculine and feminine energy. And I've slipped into it myself. I'm sure many of us do, where we start to think, well, men and women, fuck that. Get rid of that idea for the time being. It's an energy. It's a kind of intention. It's an interpretation. And so, like Evan, I think you pointed out, it's like, it's not one is better than the other. It's just sometimes one is better than the other at certain times. Yeah. And if you totally get rid of the other, you'll find that the one you think is the best is not very good at all, because it actually works because of the yin and the yang. That, as they say in cinematography and in a great metaphor for life, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. That's why in story writing, the darker the shadow of your antagonist, the brighter the light of your hero. If you make your antagonist weak, you in turn make your hero weak. Make your antagonist strong, make them powerful, don't straw man them. What's that term? It's where you make them out of steel. You steel man them. You make them strong, make their point of view make sense, give them all the ammo and ammunition, then have the hero overcome that. That is a hero. But the thing is well, we have this way of doing things right now in current culture, in my opinion, where we straw man everything and we make everything weak, and we think, oh, if I make it weaker, I'll look better and I can win. And you think you're assuring victory, and maybe you are, but you're actually ensuring that you look weak, because it's like beating up on a child. It'd be disgusting, right? But if you weaken your enemy and you just undermine them and you cheat them, you cheated to win. And we don't like that. And no one really likes that. It's like deep rooted in us that we don't like cheaters. We don't like theft. Even when we do it ourselves, we don't really like it in ourselves. And so don't cheat the feminine. Don't cheat the masculine. Encourage them, embrace them, fulfill them, use them for what they bring to the table, and give them both the chance to flourish. And they will help and assist each other, because the stronger one is, the stronger the other is. And you'll find that symbiotically, wonderful things happen. But yeah, it's okay to have the masculine kind of leave the room for a moment, or have the feminine leave the room for a moment, and let things be explored with just one or the other, to see sometimes how they are on their own. There's so much I could say, Evan. I'll leave it there.
No, you've given me, you've triggered sort of an interesting observation, I guess, observation or thought. You know, that whole idea of just giving space for each of them. And you also brought in like the yin and the yang, which, you know, is interesting because like when I was young, you know, seeing the yin yang, it was just like, you know, it was just, I don't know. There was almost something like that I thought was like a hokey kind of image, you know, but since I came to understand it, you know, what that symbol is years ago, it's such a powerful symbol, you know, that encapsulates so much, to me, truth about reality, right? And definitely it works that way with masculinity and femininity. Anywhere there is that, you can see that duality, that yin and yang is in play, right? And so it's like, even though, and in its best, even when one has left the room, there's still a little piece. There's like a little seed of the one still in the room, right? I think when it's at its absolute best, right? And to just kind of give an example of that, you know, this thing of like when the writer's in the room and the editor's in the room. And so like that editor is that masculine, right? But that editor is still empathetic to what the feminine is trying to do, right? And when it's saying things like, it's not just like, you need to cut this and you need to get rid of that, you know, to me, that's like an imbalance, right? And, you know, like where the feminine's being like, oh, you know, there's this thing I love about that. We can't cut that out and blah, 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 blah. Right. Well, it's like, to me, what went through my head was the masculine is not just being cold. It's just saying like, you have something better. Nice. Right. Nice. Like, it's like it's like, yeah, no, I know you love it, but you've got something better. Right. I understand how this like, because again, that's part of the thing with that feminine energy, is that it's everything. It's infinite potential, and that includes stuff that's sometimes shit.
Yeah.
Right? And so sometimes that's the stuff that comes through, right? But also in that space is the thing that's brilliant. Right? So it's like, look, you have better. This is not your best. Go back in there, go back into your ether and find something better. Find a way of saying this thing, but in a different way that is compelling, that is more honest, that is more, you know, whatever it needs to be. It's in there. I know it's in there because everything's in there. Right? That's the incredible thing of creativity. And, you know, it says a lot to do, you know, like when we get really precious about our ideas of things, where we're like, oh no, but I have to make this thing perfect. And it's just like, look, this doesn't need to be perfect. You know, we talk about like first drafts are such a great example of writing, has such a great perspective on the creative process, in the sense that, like, yeah, that first draft is usually not good. It contains a lot, like it contains, hopefully, all of the important seeds, but it's typically not good in its finish, right? And the acceptance of that is a big part of a writer's journey, right? And it's like, yeah, just get that first draft out there, right? Because now you're going to go through that process of coming back and being like, okay, let's strip out the stuff that's just it's not so good, and let's come back and let's find the thing that's better, right? Let's go back into that space, and after the editor has had their time to just kind of find the things that don't hold up so well, or just not even that, but I've mentioned this before, but there's this, I love the movie Midnight in Paris, and there's this scene where Owen Wilson's character is with Gertrude Stein, who is one of, like, a writer, but she was also, like, she edited many of the greats, read their works, and she was she was someone that a lot of people trusted to give them feedback and critique. And so he's at this scene, he's given her his novel to read, right? And now he's come back to her because he's gone back in time and through this magical little story, and she's read his story, and she's giving him feedback, and the feedback she's giving him is basically is something like I don't understand why you're so afraid to just say this, right? Like, she's like, I can see the thing that you're trying to say, and I just don't understand why you're not allowing that. That's like that beautiful, like, because that's that masculine. I'm like, I'm the editor. I'm giving you the critique, but I'm also seeing the thing. I'm also seeing that creative spark, and and so I'm giving you the feedback that's there to inspire you. That's, to me, always like the thing that gets lost, especially today, with like the art of criticism and critiquing, especially within art and creativity, is like, it should inspire. It's supposed to inspire. It's supposed to inspire the creator to be more honest, to be more truthful, to get to the heart of the thing more, right? For whatever their unique voice is to come through fuller. Like, that's critiquing at its absolute best. And that's a masculine thing. But it's always with that little seed of the feminine with it, right? That gives it that kind of compassion and understanding, and isn't just about cutting something down, because the masculine can do that, right? It can just cut something down without giving that point of inspiration.
Wow, man, I that really hit me. You got something better. I love that, because it's like, it's not that I want to tear down what you're doing. It's just that I want to focus on the really good thing here. The thing that you're bringing to this, that, I don't know, it's just resonating, right? And it's the element of compassion in the masculine energy is such an important element when it comes to editing, because like, if you just come in and you're like, how do you know? Like, as an editor, I think you always have to take a bit of a humility pill too. It's like, how do I really know I know? Like, you think you know, but you need to come in with a little piece of humble pie as well and nibble on it as you come along, where it's like, well, here's what I tend to see. Here's what tends to be, right and wrong, just black and white thinking, structure, whatever, this type of stuff. But it's like, remember, that's also just what you've seen. And when you look at it, I think as the editor, you have to go, well, what about this is true? Like, what about this actually resonates, matters, is to care about? To go back to that script, I think I might have talked about this in the last episode, but I'll talk about it here, is like that one where the literary was like, this scene is inspired. There was this part where I like, one of the characters was like, this is how these fucking people, I was talking about informants who like the police and undercovers use to like figure out how to infiltrate like gangs and corruption and whatever. And this guy's opinion, like he was so clearly just jaded and hurt. And he's like, these people are like scum. He's like, but you make them feel like they're special, but they're dirt on your shoe. You know what I mean? And it's just like, and like just the way he was talking was like, he'd been hurt. He had clearly been betrayed. He had clearly seen the ugliness of this world that this younger officer was kind of entering. And he's like, these are not your friends. These people will fucking hang you. Like, you know what I mean? And it's just like almost fatherly, fucking brutal. But there's like something in that where you go, yeah, fucking criminality is glamorized a lot. We see like Breaking Bad and, The Sopranos, and we think, oh, how cool. But we forget about the fact that like, yeah, they'll fucking bury you, man. Like these people, like, when they're your friends, they might be your best friends, but also like they're like the unscrupulous. Like this is just like the morals, the ethics, like the willingness. And there's something about that where maybe when you're writing your criminal thriller or your criminal drama, whatever the heck you're working on, that maybe something about that at some point resonated with you. And maybe it's not because you were involved in the criminal world. Like for me, it was just because like I had, I was betrayed by a couple friends, and that's how I was speaking through this character as I was writing it. But it's like, it was almost like a father warning his son, like, just, I know you're seeing these people look like they're all right, but like, just keep one foot out the door just in case, just be a little bit careful. Cause like, it's almost like this guy like didn't want him to he doesn't want him to die. He doesn't want him to just like, he doesn't want him to lose his way. You know what I mean? He's like trying to keep him on the straight and narrow. Cause like, and so there's a certain element of like, okay, there's truth in that nugget. Now the scene might not be written very well. It might be kind of poorly written, or there might be cliches, or there might be other things in it. Who knows? But let's go back to that nugget. That's good. Let's double down on that. Let's focus on that. And that's where the editor needs to come in and say, hey, this thing here works. So whatever's happening around here, maybe this isn't kind of tracking, or that kind of looks like this, but this thing here, that's working. And that's where I think the masculine becomes very powerful in coordination with the feminine, where it's like, because like the feminine energy flourishes on a seed of potential. And also the masculine is very good at taking something like, hey, this is just kind of going off into something that we don't need to go off into. And it's like, let's kind of focus it back on these things that matter. And, you have to remember too, I think as the editor didn't create anything. The editor is just looking at what was created, and they're like trimming the edges and sculpting it and helping it to have like more direction. And it's not chaotic, right? But they didn't create the tree. They're kind of trimming the tree. And so you don't want to kill the tree in the trimming process. You don't want to just go like, let's just cut it right at the stem. It's like, no, we just spent all this time with the tree growing. Like, let's not, like, if the tree is truly rotten at the core and it's not worth growing any further, then fine, let's cut it down and plant a new one or pull it from its roots. But like, if it actually has something, if there's something in the seed of it that's really good, let's find that and let's edit towards that.
Well, let's edit towards it, and I'll say it's like, let's discover the potentiality of this, right? Because again, that feminine thing is infinite in all directions, the macro and the micro, right? And sometimes I think that's what happens, like particularly in storytelling, where it's just like, oh, let's go, and it's like, let's go in this direction. It's just like, well, that's too macro in this direction for something that we've already got going on here. So let's now start going into the micro of this one thing. Let's leave that thing alone, because we can now like look down into the fine minutia of this one thing, which we haven't looked into. You know, it's always that feedback in a certain kind of way, where it's like with that feminine thing, where it's just like, I know you want to go off and do this big thing, and that's a cool idea. Maybe we do that somewhere else. But right here, like, this is like the heart of this thing, right? And we can explore that more deeply. And it's just as much creativity as if we were going in that direction too. Like there's just as much creativity that's going on as we get smaller and smaller and smaller into this thing, right? As we really discover the nuance of these things, like the nuance of these relationships, the nuance of this particular plot, how this certain thing would play out or whatever it is, like, and you have that too, right? I think that's the thing that I'm really walking away with in this conversation, right? That I'm really, I don't know, kind of inspired by and you know, jacked up by here, is that like, yeah, like that feminine creative thing is just like, like there's no end to that thing. Like it's just, it can find something everywhere, right? It's about just where are you pointing it towards? Where are you focusing it towards, right? Which I think is great for not getting too precious about things, you know, which is something that is I know that I've dealt with it for sure, but I know it's definitely a big thing for anybody who's in anything creative, right? Any sort of creative pursuit, is you can get really way too precious about things, and it stops you. It's a way of, sometimes for some people, it's a form of self-sabotage, right? Where it's like, you can never move on. You can never move to something else because you're just too attached to things being a certain kind of way. And instead, by just like, it's like, hey, you're not limited in anything. Like it's sometimes we choose to limit it because it actually allows us to be more creative in ways that are more meaningful, right? Like that's in so many ways part of the creative process is just like, what, like, yes, there's infinite creativity, but what is the way for us to most meaningfully direct it, right? Like, what's the most meaningful way in which we can direct this at this moment, right? And sometimes that means something's got to go on the chopping block, but it doesn't mean that this thing is suddenly less. It's very often because it's like, no, it's we need to dig this well deeper. We don't need to dig a second well. We just need to dig this one deeper, and we'll hit the spring, right? We'll hit the thing, because now we're finding things that we wouldn't have found otherwise, right? And in that way, it's like that feminine thing is still getting what it wants to do, right? It still gets that play and that creativity. It's just like, oh wow, we're finding all these little things in here, right? Which is, again, we're always there, right? But you just had to give it the attention. Yeah.
Well, you know, okay, one other thing I'll say, because you just brought this in, is the micro macro thing. And I do think that a lot of the time, if you have something and you're like, I don't know, this isn't working, like, look to the micro, because you'll actually find a lot of the time the answers are in something small and insignificant you're not noticing. I often find a lot of the gold. It's like if you were like going for gold, you know, you like shuffle through a lot of crap and then you find these little nuggets, right? These little bits. And so creativity is like that. And that's where sometimes the micro happens. But I do think, and just to play it on the other side, sometimes you can get so hyper-focused on a small detail. And I think you really got to sometimes ask yourself, like, yeah, but like, who cares? Like, who's going to care about this? And so I do think that sometimes you might have this idea, and it's a fine balance, and it's a learning how to kind of navigate this. But you might have some story that's just getting really like narrow. It's just getting really focused on like this one relationship or this one person or something. And it might be good to just kind of like let that go for a minute and then go like, well, what's going on around them? What's happening in the world? And what are they trying to do? And, and I think when it comes to storytelling, you can get in an inertia and an indulgence of exploring things that sometimes it's just like, just like let that go and like open things up a little bit. So I'm just saying there's an alternative. And I think I guess my point with this is that it's not always one way or the other. I think what's important to remember is that sometimes the answer is you need to go bigger and more macro. Sometimes you need to go more micro. But I think the thing is like check in. If this is not working, just be honest with yourself and go, okay, if it's not working, would going bigger and having a more higher, like a wider scope help me? Or do I need to narrow the scope? Will that help me? But it's all about just finding ways to direct your energy and not have it bog you down or diffuse you or like limit you. Okay, Evan, I'm going to just say the beer again because we're doing the same one. Moon Underwater Sorio Kiwi Pale Ale. It's been an interesting and unique beer. We both said that. I don't know if Evan needs to repeat it. But Evan, what are your final thoughts, my man?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've really enjoyed this conversation. So yeah, it's nice that we like dove in to this thing that we've often alluded to in other conversations, the whole masculine, feminine thing. And it's not, to me, it's not a belief thing, about talking about masculine, feminine. It's just a way, it's a way of talking about something. It's a filter in which we can talk about, in this case, sort of like the creative process, right? And it that can lend us a certain kind of perspective, helps us to maybe find certain things through this lens and perspective. And I've been really enjoying it. I hope we do something like this again, in the future. And yeah, I think that I'll just reiterate the whole thing of like, when it comes to masculine, feminine, and all this like that, yeah, it's not a case of one being better than the other. It's these things work together, right? In balance, in equality with one another, and having that sense of respect and giving each of these things their space, right? Their rightful space to claim is and I think that takes time for us to understand as well, right? Like that's in many ways part of the practice of an artist, right? Is all right, this needs the floor here, and now this needs the floor, now this needs the floor, right? And following what that flow is, borrowing from our last podcast, flow, the masculine and feminine is part of that flow, and when we give one more voice than the other, and knowing when to do that, but they each have an important perspective, and they're not ignorant of one another at all. I think that we often have that sort of, we have this idea that it's like a one or the other, but it's like they're always in contact, right? Even though one might be getting the floor at a certain moment, there's always, again, that sort of like that yin and yang. There's always the seed of the others. There's always some kind of a presence of one, right? And if there isn't, then that's actually a problem to a certain degree. It's like that they're each in their best when there's at least a part of the other still there, right? And I hope that we've explored enough of those, sort of given enough analogies and images and stuff like that to describe that reality. And yeah, man, I enjoyed this conversation a lot.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well. I suppose my final thoughts on all of this are just, that recognize that you have both of these energies inside of you, and they are kind of energies. There's like an energy to, well, I want to solve the problem. I want to get this done. I want to figure out what I'm doing here. I want to get clarity, and that's that might be an expression of your masculine energy. Whereas like, you may have this feminine energy, which is like, well, of course you do, but it's like a feeling or a desire or an exploration. And you go, well, that's, if you're too in your masculine, you might go, well, that's silly. That's a waste of time and all of this stuff. And if you tell yourself that, you actually, you really like do yourself a disservice. But also, if you're like, oh, I want to do this and I want to do that and I want to do this and I want to do that, and it's like fucking like you're doing yourself a disservice too if you just kind of go, just pick one or two, pick something and don't get so out there and like, well, I don't want limits on me. It's like, no, but limits are where art exists. And that's a whole other conversation I think we even had at one point, is like, you need limits, you need boundaries, you need look, you need a canvas to paint on. You need a limit to your canvas to some degree. It has to have some limit. If you're gonna draw a line and it has no point of end, you're just drawing a line for the rest of your life. It's like, so you creativity wants limits imposed on it. I know this sounds like a backwards idea, but it's actually true. And boundaries are nothing without anything to fill it. So the feminine energy, that whole thing, it fills the space, it fills the canvas. It's what we fill the script with. But the masculine is, let's put this in a structure, let's organize it, let's direct it. But what energy are you going to direct if you don't include the feminine? So like you need both. And I think that you walk away, and don't buy in. I guess this is my final thought. Don't buy into this immature thing of like, this is better than the other, and better. Like, don't buy into that shit. That's all just a disservice to you and everybody else. Embrace the fact that you're a very full and complex human expression of energy, and that you may find you have developed more in one area more than the other. Maybe you're more in your feminine and maybe you're more in your masculine. And look, you're a good match for certain things. And you might find that you're too much of something for other things. It's okay. You'll find your fit, you'll find your expression, you'll find your place. But whatever you are, whatever your expression is fine. And we need both. We need both types of energies. And sometimes people flourish in one and other people flourish in another. And I think, if you're a very creative person, you might find that you just flourish more in your feminine energy, and it might be good for you to have a good, trusted confidant that's got some masculine energy that can help keep you directed and in focus and whatever. And if you're very like rule-bound, structured, directed, it might be really good for you to find some chaos in your life, find some energy to fill it with, find something to make what you're good at directing, like have something to actually direct. So, yeah, I don't know. Big topic, lots of things to say. I'm glad we did it.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.